Well, guys, today we are going to be doing something fun on Life Raising Sheep. We are dyeing some wool. Now, I just freshly spun 3 skeins of this gorgeous gray. It's about a number 4 thickness, maybe a little bit thicker than that. And I need to dye some of this blue. Now, my favorite thing to dye is gray wool in some sort of variegated looking color. And denim blue has definitely taken the lead. Eggplant also works really well, but maybe we'll try that next time. So, because this is a bit of a process, we are going to get busy. Now, this is quite simple to do. I am using a low immersion method, which basically means I am using a big cooking pan, which basically means I'm using a cooking steam tray, so to speak, and low water levels in there, and then the yarn is just laying out and we just squirt the color on top. It is great fun and a lot of variation, which I think is wonderful. So first thing we need to do is, as you can see, we've got our skeins here, but when we undo them, oh, I did tie this one. It's just tied with gray. I was about to say I hadn't tied them. Now you want to make sure these ties are quite nice and loose because you need to be able to have the dye get in there. So you don't want this too tightly done. This is looking pretty good on this one. So we're going to get the others out. And basically what would happen is you'd end up with a little streak here, which this type of method here is quite forgiving because obviously it's a variegated yarn we're going to get. So I will prep up the other ones and then we will come back. Now, one thing you want to make sure you are doing is that you are using a cotton or something like that to tie this off. Do not use wool. It will felt to your yarn and won't be fun. So now that we have our yarn tied up and prepped and ready, it needs to soak. Now I pre-soak this just in tap warm water for about 30 minutes. So that's where we are now. We're just going to kind of lay it in here and let that sit. And then while this is soaking, we're going to prep our dye and get our water heating in our little steam table. So now we're going to mix up our dye. Now you can see I already have some pre-mixed here. This is a color that I use a lot, but this is not enough for this task. We are dyeing 3 100-gram skeins. So that's quite a bit of yarn when you get it all laid out. So for all my dyes, I do 1 tablespoon of dye without making a mess. That's why I have the little plastic tub underneath, just in case. So 1 tablespoon is in to a 1/2 cup of water. It just gives you enough moisture and liquid that you can squirt. It'll all make sense later in the video, trust me. So that is my ratio mixture. I just shake that up and then it's ready. And you know what? If we need to mix more, it's not a big deal because I just mix the same thing every single time. Doesn't matter what color. So we're about halfway through our soak for our yarn. So I am getting the pan set up here and ready to go. Now I put 4 cups in here so far. I'm actually going to put, I have 4 ready, but I'm only going to put 2 of them in there. And I'm going to save the other 2 just in case it looks like we need them. Then I'm going to turn it on, not too high, but as you can see here, my pan covers 2 elements, so I got to make sure I turn on both of them. And once this starts to get a little bit warm, we're going to add a 1/2 cup of vinegar. Now, a 1/2 cup of vinegar is a little bit excessive. A 1/2 cup would be for more like a pound of yarn. And I've only got the 3 skeins, which is a little, well, I don't know, we're getting 3/4 at least anyways. But I'm just going to go with the 1/2 cup because that keeps it easy and simple. And then I know these colors will strike onto my yarn and then we should get a really good dye rich color. One thing that I should say too that is very important is make sure you're using dedicated equipment for these dyes. You don't want to use, okay, these are my actual measuring cups, but that's just plain water. But my tongs for working with them, my measuring tools, all that sort of stuff here, my measuring tablespoons, all those are in a separate drawer with all my dye stuff so that we don't get them mixed up with our regular eating. And as you can see, I'm using just dollar store disposable pans for this. Now these are a little bit more high quality. I think they were actually $5 at Dollarama, but I bought a whole bunch of them because they are perfect and they last time and time again. So it saves me having to go out and buy some expensive cookware. Not that I'm not watching at thrift stores, because if I can find this sort of a steam tray thing at a thrift store, I would definitely buy it. But we are going to get this up. You'd want a temperature between sort of 140, 160. You do not want boiling. That will agitate your wool and cause felting. So we just want it warm enough that there's a bit of steam, because that is what helps our dye set. So our water is about 120. I don't really want it to go much higher than that right at the moment, because my yarn is cooling off, and you don't want to shock the yarn by going from cool to warm or hot water. So we're going to add our vinegar, that half cup, just like so. There we go. I'm going to use my tongs and just kind of work that into the water. And then we're just going to take this out of here. I kind of fold it in half. And you just want to press it. You don't want to twist it or squeeze it or anything that might cause it to felt. All the water doesn't even have to come out of it. You just kind of get some. And then we're going to lay it down in our pan here. Try and keep the little grabby things at the top, because once you've got the dye on this, it's a lot easier to be able to grab it at something. So you can see here what I mean when I say low immersion. If I push that down, that water does come up over my hand and over the yarn, but a lot of the yarn is above the water level, and that's what we want to see. So you could use gloves if you want. I might put them on if I really start playing around with my hands or having to separate the fibers. But at this point, I'm not really going to get my hands dirty, so I'm not going to worry too much about it. So as you can see, I can still get my hand in there. It is definitely starting to heat up. I see a little piece of hay. We're going to get that out of there. So let's start the fun. There is no rhyme nor reason, no right or wrong way. You just squirt it on. And this is why you end up with such a variegated look, is because the dye doesn't always go on evenly or strike evenly. And it's just accentuated, in my opinion, by the gray fibers, because that also has a variegated look right from the beginning. Okay, we're going to stop there. There's quite a bit of dye in there. You can see I've used, what, about that much? We'll keep going, don't worry. But we're going to get our tongs, and we're just going to kind of press it into the water. Definitely needs more blue, I can already tell. What you're looking for, and I'm going to zoom in to show you this, pushing that to the side, how much dye that yarn is soaking up. You don't want your water to have tons of excess dye. That's just a waste of products. So far, we need more dye. And this is where it gets really fun, because you can choose areas and really concentrate it to get a darker color, right? See how I did that there? Any of these bits that are really gray, I'm just going to go in and really blue them up along this edge here. It kind of is fun. Told you we were going to have fun today. You'll probably use most of this container of dye. So about a tablespoon, probably 2 if I hadn't already had some in the container. All right, let's see what's going on under this here. Oh, that's much richer now. Oh, I'm starting to hear it getting hot enough to want to boil. So we got to watch that. We don't want it to boil. I'm just trying to make sure I've got all the grays covered with some sort of dye. You want to try not to agitate it too much. I'm just kind of pushing it down into the liquid, because I don't want it to felt more than it already is going to. This is not a super wash yarn. This is straight Icelandic from the sheep. So there will be felting if you're not careful. I really hope this picks up the color. It is a gorgeous denim blue. You can see right in like this area over here, we've got some lights where that gray is still sort of peeking through. That's what I love about using gray for dyeing. You get such variation in color. So now we're at the point where we wait. I know that's torturous, right? Don't piddle, don't play with it or anything. Just leave it alone. You do want to watch that it doesn't get too hot and boiling, because again, that agitation, the boiling makes no difference really, I find, to the dyeing. Don't get me wrong. I've had it accidentally boil before. But what it does make a difference to is how felted that yarn's going to be when we take it out. So you want to cover that so that it gets steaming. and leave that for about 15 minutes. And then we're going to come back, we're going to flip it and see if there's any dye needed on the other side. And then we will let it sit again. So let's wait. All right, we have been 15 minutes. I'm just going to demonstrate here for you. If I separate this, look, that water has soaked up all the dye. There's very little dye still sitting in this water. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to flip them. Hopefully this will go well on camera. Oh, it is warm enough water though, I'll tell you that. Let's get our little, this would be where a different colored tie would be handy. All right. So we're just going to get that up and just flip, make a mess. And you can already see on that back side, that blue dye did not get there. So that's why we flip, so that we can see what we're working with. Now the nice thing is, I want a variegated yarn. So I want some of that gray to still kind of pop through, or at least be lighter blue for me. There's still a little bit of dye coming out into that water. But now we've got that flipped over, we're just going to take the rest of the dye. There we go, get that in there. Perfect. Now we're just going to take the rest of the dye that was in our little container here, and we're going to squirt that on where we need. And again, just dab it into that water. Now we need the gloves because the water is just hot enough that my hands don't like it. Okay. As I mentioned, you're probably going to use that 2 tablespoons, tablespoon and a half to do the 300 grams. Just want to make sure I'm separating some of this fiber. Make sure that it's all the way through with some color. Perfect. All right. And then, once again, we wait. Gonna put the lid back on this and let her sit for another 15 minutes. And then we'll rinse and see what we end up with. All right, moment of truth. We have had another 15 minutes. You can see, hopefully it's showing that gorgeous blue color in there. And let's see. Oh, look at that. Very, very little wastage. A little bit of blue coming out, but not too terribly much. I did end up using that whole container. So you'd be about 2 tablespoons of the dye mixed in with that water to do this amount of yarn. Now we're going to let this cool off. I've turned the elements off. We're just going to let it sit for probably about 15-20 minutes to get a little bit of a cool down so that it is manageable to work with. I don't want to shock this from hot into a nice cold rinse. So we're going to give it a few minutes and then we'll come back and see how much dye actually comes out of this. I'm thinking, looking at that water being so clear, we're going to be pretty smooth sailing for rinsing this out. So the less you have to rinse it, the less it's going to felt and the less it's going to all get stuck together. All right, we are cooled down sufficiently and I've done a lukewarm rinse for our first one just to kind of not shock it. As you can see, I mean, I've got my glove on, but I can get my hand in this now. Look at the color, lovely. Now make sure we're grabbing it nice in the middle. Now I just tend to just grab and squeeze some of it out. We don't want to agitate it too much. Even just squeezing it out, you can already see some of those grays are still there as a real pale blue, but then we have some of the darker blue colors as well, which is lovely. And very little color coming back into this water, which is fantastic. Oh, this one again, look at that. See those little bits of grayish kind of blue in there? Then you got that real rich blue streaks from where we sprayed on the dye. It's going to be gorgeous. Now, as I mentioned, I had put warm water. This is quite warm in here for my first rinse. Now we're having very little color seepage, so I'm going to start adding some cold slowly, just because I'm impatient. I should have waited for the yarn to be a little cooler in that pan by the oven, but this will just allow it to cool down gradually. Now this is why we use a white pan. You can see how blue that water has gone. So we are losing some of the color, but believe me, this will wash pretty clear really quite quickly. And I just squish it to the edge. Drain that out. And then refill it back up. Keep that out of the way though, so it doesn't get agitated. And it's rinse and repeat until our water is running clear. All right, we are on our 7th rinse here. I decided to do them one at a time because it just made it so that I could use less water. But if you see here, I pull it back and squeeze. It is looking pretty clear. When I pull that all down into a corner, there might be a slight bluish tint. I'm going to rinse one more time, but we're pretty much there. Look at this beautiful color. So gorgeous. All right, one last rinse down. Pull back. Oh yeah, that's better. Pretty much there. Now, next thing I do with this, take my handy dandy salad spinner, plop her in. And give her a spin. Honestly, using the salad spinner saves so much time. So now we hang these, we wait for them to dry, and then look at how blue it is. It's so pretty. Hang them. I'm putting them behind the wood stove, so hopefully we'll be dry in a day, and then I'll bring you back when it's time to wind these up and make them look all pretty. They are all dry. I've got them off the hooks from behind the wood stove. Absolutely turned out beautiful. I love the color that we have here. It is that variegated grayish, bluish. It's perfect. I'll show you it in a finished product at the end. But now, as you can see, I've got my, I think it's called a windmill, umbrella, I'm not sure. Anyways, the thing that opens out. I've got this out here, and we're going to wind these into balls, because one thing you'll notice is after all that washing, they're quite felted together. This would be really awkward for somebody if they were purchasing it from me, or even for myself for using right from the skein. So I find it always nicer to just put those out right off the bat into the wound ball for people. So that is where we're at. We're going to wind these. Before we can do that, we do have to count how many yards we had on each one, because I do keep that in my book and I write it all down with the weights so that I know what I've produced from our flock of Icelandic sheep, which is always nice. And one thing I always try and aim for when I pre-measure out my rovings is that each ball ends up being 100 grams at least. And here you can see this is why I try and keep it all relatively uniform, is I'm selling them all at the same price and it works great for craft sales. So there you have it. All 3 balls nicely packaged up and ready to go. I am so pleased with how this one turns out. To be honest, this is what I'm thinking to do in the future for any dyed yarns that I'm going to do, especially for selling purposes, is I love the variegated, whether it is this color or the RIT gray. It would make beautiful coloring as well with that brown undertone instead of the black undertone. So that's something I'm going to experiment a little bit more with in the future. I really hope that the camera is picking up the subtle difference between those two. On the one side, you've got the gray right here, which is the black undercoat with the graying, where this side here, we've got the RIT gray, which is the brown undercoat with the graying. And I do think they're going to produce different products, which I'm super excited for. In my mind, this just allows me a little bit more steadiness, variation, less variation, in the sense of somebody wants that color again, which is what the situation is right now. I sold some of this and somebody needed some more for a project, so I was able to dye it up without any real difficulty doing so. So that's what I'm hoping to move forward with in the future. I have a lot of fleece and a lot of yarn spun, and hopefully we can find some avenues for selling that as well as using it. And speaking of using it, I'm going to show you right now a project that I've just finished up for the craft sale this weekend. And here we have a finished set of mittens with that gorgeous blue combined with our dark gray fleece. And I just love it. So this particular pair of mittens here, it was done with yarn that I actually chain plied. That gray as well as the blue were both chain plied. And that's something I don't do very often, but I was just playing around and experimenting and seeing if I could do it and make it work. And I really love it because it does produce a really thick mitten. So I might make some more of that. We'll see in the upcoming video. But all in all, very, very happy with that product. And now it's all ready to go for the craft sale this weekend. So hope you enjoyed the video. Hope it was a little bit informative. I am just getting into the dyeing, so by no means am I an expert. I'm just kind of playing around with the RIT dyes because that is what is easily accessible for me. And hopefully I'll take you along for the journey as we experiment and discover some more wonderful colors.